Look at him begging like a child who never grew up, Daniel sneered, his voice sharp enough to slice the silence of the dining room. And the burst of laughter that followed from cousins and uncles felt like 1,000 knives twisting in my gut as I sat frozen in my chair. My wife's eyes wide with shame beside me, her hand tightening around her glass as if she could hold herself from shattering too. I didn't answer right away because the weight of humiliation was heavier than words could carry. Instead, I felt the burning heat of every gaze locked on me, the pitying smirks, the cruel chuckles, the way my daughter looked down at her plate as though hiding from the storm, and I knew in that instant that the night would mark me forever, though no one at that table could guess what I carried quietly in my back pocket, the unseen weapon they would never see coming. My name is Michael Harlan. I'm 42 years old, and I grew up in Dayton, Ohio, where my father once told me that pride was a shield, but silence could be a sword, and I had learned to sharpen silence into something lethal. They didn't know it yet, but tonight planted the seed of their downfall. The humiliation had begun with something simple, something petty, my father's will, read aloud in this suffocating room with mahogany walls and silverware that gleamed like false smiles, declaring that the house, the land, the business, and nearly every dollar would go to Daniel, my younger brother, while I, the so-called responsible son who spent years holding this family together, was left with scraps. The words came out of the lawyer's mouth like a verdict, and Daniel had seized the moment with theater, turning the will into a stage play where he was king and I was a jester. He lifted the old family whiskey bottle, a dusty relic our father once swore we should never open except on sacred nights, and poured himself a glass while mocking me. Guess this is too fine for Michael, he prefers his gas station beer. The laughter echoed again, hollow and cruel, and I stared at that bottle. My father's bottle as though it was the only anchor keeping me from exploding. That bottle became the symbol of everything. Betrayal, inheritance, power stolen in plain sight. Inside my chest, anger beat like a second heart, but my face betrayed nothing. I had learned the hard way that rage shown too early only feeds your enemies, while rage hidden becomes strategy. And strategy quiet, patient, merciless, was the secret advantage I had hinted at earlier. The thing Daniel and the others could never imagine simmered beneath my silence. Every empire, my father once told me, falls not by fire from outside but by rot from within, and as Daniel lifted that glass of whiskey in mock salute, I knew the rot had already begun. The lawyer, Mr. Carver, cleared his throat, uneasy with the theatrics, but no one cared. Why would they? They had already won. Even my mother sat silently, eyes fixed on her lap, unwilling to meet mine, as though complicit by her silence. My wife's hand brushed against mine under the table, a desperate signal not to break, not to reveal the storm brewing behind my calm eyes. I wanted to scream, to pound the table until the bottle shattered, but instead I leaned back, swallowed the heat, and let Daniel's gloating continue. Every mocking word was another brick in the tower I would one day set on fire. The humiliation deepened when Daniel turned his attention to my daughter, Lily, only 14 and too young to carry the weight of family cruelty. "Sweetheart," he said with a sick grin, "don't worry, you'll have a real home to visit for the holidays. My house, my rules. Maybe your dad can sleep in the guest room if he behaves." Gasps and awkward chuckles followed, and Lily's cheeks turned scarlet, her fork clattering against the plate as she fought tears. That was the breaking point, not for my composure, but for the promise I carved into my heart right then. Daniel would pay, not with fists or fury, but with something far worse: loss of everything he had just stolen. Before we get deeper into this story, make sure you're subscribed, and tell us in the comments where in the world you're listening from. I excused myself to the bathroom, not because I needed to, but because I couldn't let them see my hands trembling with fury. Staring at my reflection in the mirror, I whispered, "Patience, Michael. Silence is the sword. Silence cuts deepest." The bathroom smelled faintly of bleach, and the single bulb overhead flickered as though it understood the chaos inside me. I splashed cold water on my face, steadied my breathing, and thought of that bottle of whiskey, our father's whiskey, the one object sacred in our family, the one symbol Daniel had desecrated in his drunken performance. That bottle was more than liquor. It was memory, legacy, bloodline. And in its desecration I found the perfect symbol for justice yet to come. When I returned to the dining room, Daniel was already mid-story, bragging about business deals, fake triumphs, and future plans for the house and land. He painted himself as the heir, the visionary, the one worthy of carrying the Harlan name forward, while I sat in silence, the dismissed son, the forgotten one. But while they laughed, I listened. Every boast, every slip of arrogance, every exaggerated detail, I stored it like ammunition. And as the night dragged on, I began to notice cracks. Daniel's twitch when finances came up, the way he avoided specific numbers, the nervous flicker in his eyes when Mr. Carver mentioned tax implications. Beneath the bravado, there was weakness, and weakness was opportunity. I could feel the weight of Lily's eyes on me, searching for a sign that I wasn't broken, that her father wasn't defeated. So I straightened in my chair, forced a calm smile, and locked eyes with Daniel. "Congratulations, brother," I said evenly, the words tasting like ash. "Dad must have seen something in you worth betting the farm on. I hope you can live up to it." He laughed, mistaking my composure for surrender, raising the whiskey bottle again as if to crown himself king. But inside, I was already writing the script of his downfall, word by word, detail by detail. The room grew heavier with each passing toast, the smell of whiskey thick in the air, the clink of glasses like mock applause. My wife leaned in close, whispering, "Don't give him the satisfaction." She didn't know I was far past giving satisfaction. I was building something larger, something inevitable. The night blurred into a haze of laughter and humiliation, but I kept my silence sharp, my eyes steady, my heart hammering like a war drum. When the dinner finally ended, people began to drift away, leaving behind the echoes of their cruelty and the bitter smell of whiskey soaked into the tablecloth. Daniel clapped me on the back of the door, smirking. "Don't take it too hard, Mike. Life's about winners and losers. You just got dealt the wrong hand." I looked at him, really looked at him, and thought of the line I would one day repeat to him in reverse. "Life's about details, and you forgot the ones that matter." As his laughter trailed off into the night, I stood there in the doorway, the cold Ohio air rushing in, mixing with the heat of my rage, and I knew the game had only just begun. My silence would be the noose, and he had already slipped his head inside without knowing. The whiskey bottle gleamed under the dim chandelier, a promise, a curse, and a weapon all in one. I reached for my coat, my mind already unraveling the first thread of the plan, when my phone buzzed inside the coat pocket, the vibration sharp against my ribs, a reminder that while Daniel had the spotlight tonight, I still had something he couldn't control. I stepped outside into the bitter air, the night pressing down with the weight of unfinished conversations, and slid the phone from my pocket. A message blinked on the screen, a screenshot forwarded from a friend who owed me a favor. Daniel's name at the top of a chat thread, his words spilling reckless across the digital page, boasting about deals he'd hidden, debts he'd shuffled, manipulations he thought no one would ever uncover. I stared at the glowing screen, the evidence humming like a live wire in my hand, and a small smile tugged at the corner of my mouth. Silence wasn't just a sword, it was a trapdoor. The laughter from inside drifted out, muffled by the heavy front door, and for a moment I imagined bursting back in, slamming the screenshot down on the table, watching Daniel's smug grin collapse into panic. But timing was everything. Revenge delivered too soon is just noise. Revenge delayed is symphony. So I slipped the phone back into my pocket, tucked the screenshot away like the first bullet in a loaded gun, and walked into the night air, each breath cold enough to remind me I was still in control. My wife, Claire, followed a few minutes later, her eyes searching mine, her voice low. "Michael, please don't let him break you. Lily needs to see strength." I turned to her, the frost of my breath mixing with hers, and whispered, "She see it, just not tonight." Claire studied me as though trying to measure how far gone I was, then nodded, her trust fragile but still there. Trust, I thought, is a currency rarer than inheritance. Once it's gone, no amount of money can buy it back. Driving home, the headlights of my truck carved tunnels of light through the dark Ohio roads, Lily asleep in the back seat, her face soft but tear-streaked. Claire sat quiet beside me, her hands folded tightly, the air between us filled with unsaid words. The whiskey bottle burned in my mind, not as drink but as symbol. My father's rule had been clear. It was never to be open except when the family was whole. Tonight Daniel had broken that rule with a smirk, and in that act he had declared himself king of ashes. I gripped the wheel tighter. Kings forget that thrones are built on details, and details are where crowns are lost. The next week blurred into a storm of whispers and cold stares. Word spread quickly through town, Daniel flaunting his inheritance, buying drinks at O'Malley's bar, telling anyone who would listen how he was finally in charge. I heard it from coworkers, neighbors, even the cashier at the diner where I got my morning coffee. Humiliation doesn't end when the moment passes. It echoes, each retelling another knife in the ribs. Yet I smiled politely. Let them laugh, let them think I was beaten. Inside, the silence sharpened. One night at the gym, sweat dripping from my brow as I hammered the heavy bag, my old friend Mark pulled me aside. He had been at the dinner, had seen Daniel's performance, and his voice carried both pity and warning. Mike, I hate to say it, but you're not just fighting him. You're fighting the whole story he's writing about you. People believe him. You need to change the story. His words hit harder than the bag because he was right. Narrative is power, and Daniel had stolen mine in front of everyone. But stories are fragile. One detail, one crack, and they collapse. I went home that night, sweat-soaked and buzzing with adrenaline, and pulled up the screenshot again. Daniel had been careless. He'd bragged in messages about debts with a construction firm, about cutting corners with tax filings, about creative accounting that would make our father roll in his grave. The messages weren't enough yet to destroy him, but they were the start of a fire waiting for gasoline. I whispered to myself, details, Michael. Build the fire right, and it'll burn on its own. Days turned into weeks, and Daniel's arrogance swelled. He threw a party at the house our father's house, inviting half the town, parking shiny new cars out front, music blasting until the windows shook. I stood across the street in the shadows, watching headlights sweep across the driveway, the old whiskey bottle displayed like a trophy on the dining room table inside. That bottle, once sacred, now emptied halfway, its spirit leaking out into Daniel's smug laughter. I clenched my fists, the chill biting into my knuckles. Patience, I reminded myself. Silence is the sword. But silence doesn't mean stillness. I began gathering threads old receipts, records of property taxes unpaid, whispers from townsfolk about Daniel's reckless spending. At work, during coffee breaks, I overheard things Daniel hadn't bothered to keep hidden. He thought the inheritance had made him untouchable, but money without discipline is just gasoline poured on dry leaves. And I was waiting with the match. The emotional whiplash hit hardest when Lily came to me one evening, her voice small, asking, Dad, are we still part of the family? Uncle Daniel said we'd probably drift away now that everything's his. Her innocence cut deeper than Daniel's cruelty ever could. I knelt, met her eyes, and told her the truth, not about my plan, not about revenge, but about what mattered. Family isn't who holds the papers, Lily. It's who holds you when you're breaking. She hugged me, clinging tighter than ever, and I felt the dual weight of her trust and my burden. Revenge wasn't just mine anymore. It was justice for her too. One evening, Claire confronted me. You've been different since that night, she said, eyes narrowing. Tell me you're not planning something reckless. I looked at her, the woman who had stood by me through layoffs, late nights, bills stacked high, and I couldn't lie. I'm planning something, yes. But reckless? No, it's smarter than that. She sighed, torn between fear and faith. Just remember, if you fall with him, Lily loses everything. Her words seared into me, a warning and a reminder. Revenge without precision is suicide. Daniel's downfall wouldn't come from fists or screams. It would come from the very stage he loved most public eyes. I pictured the screenshot leaked at the perfect moment, the debts revealed in front of investors, the whiskey bottle held up as proof of his arrogance. Justice wouldn't just strip him of wealth, it would strip him of story. And when a man like Daniel loses his story, he has nothing left. The night I decided the first move, snow was falling, soft and relentless, blanketing the town in silence. I sat at the kitchen table, laptop open, the screenshot glowing on the screen, my finger hovering over the key that would send it to the right eyes. Claire walked in, her hand on my shoulder, her voice trembling. Are you sure? I didn't look up, just whispered, silence cuts deepest. And then I pressed the key. The message shot into the digital world, a spark in dry timber. Within hours, whispers began online, murmurs of Daniel's debts, screenshots shared in private groups, questions bubbling in public forums. The narrative began to shift, slowly, subtly, but inevitably. Daniel still laughed, still boasted, still drank from the whiskey bottle, but I saw it now, the flicker in his eyes, the shadow of doubt creeping in as rumors spread. And as I sat in the dark, the glow of the screen lighting my face, I felt it, the tightening of the noose. The silence was no longer mine alone. It had become a chorus, a digital storm gathering strength. And Daniel, blind in his arrogance, kept stepping closer to the edge, unaware that the ground beneath him was already cracking, splinters running through the foundation of Daniel's story, and all I had to do was keep pressing at the fractures until the weight of his own arrogance did the rest. Rumors swirled online, friends whispered in corners of bars, and still Daniel strutted around town with the whiskey bottle as his crown, holding it up like a relic at every gathering, bragging that our father had entrusted him with everything because he was the only one strong enough to carry it. Each time I saw a photo of him, glass raised, bottle half empty now, I thought, "You're drinking from your own grave." The first real break came at a meeting Daniel didn't even know I attended. The bank had called for a review of the family business accounts, and though Daniel thought himself untouchable, protocol demanded my presence as a former partner still listed on the original charter. He strolled in late, tie loose, reeking faintly of whiskey, though it was barely past noon, shaking hands like a politician. I sat in the corner, quiet, unimportant, until the paperwork landed on the table. That was when I saw it, a clause buried deep in the founding agreement, something our father had drafted decades ago. If any inheriting member incurred debts beyond a certain threshold, control of the business defaulted to the other heir. It was legal cement, ironclad, overlooked by Daniel in his drunken victory laps. My pulse quickened. This wasn't just rumor anymore, this was law. Daniel signed papers with a flourish, laughing too loudly, dismissing the banker's thinly veiled concern over cash flow inconsistencies. He didn't notice me scanning the documents, didn't notice my silence sharpening into certainty. For the first time since the will was read, I felt the shift of power in my bones. Procedural justice, the kind that doesn't shout, doesn't punch, just rewrites the ending with a signature. I didn't speak a word at that meeting, but when Daniel clapped my shoulder on the way out, smirking as always, I nearly laughed. He had no idea he had just set the stage for his own destruction. At home, I spread the documents across the kitchen table, the clause circled in red. Claire leaned over my shoulder, eyes widening as she read it. "Michael, this changes everything." I nodded, my jaw tight. "No, it reveals everything. He's already hanging himself, we just have to let the rope tighten." Lily padded into the kitchen, rubbing sleep from her eyes, and asked what we were doing. I folded the papers quickly, hiding the storm from her, and said, "Just fixing a few broken things." She smiled softly, trusting me, and went back upstairs. Trust, I thought again, rarer than inheritance, and infinitely more binding. Daniel, meanwhile, doubled down. The online murmurs had reached him, and instead of retreating, he went louder, hosting bigger parties, making bigger boasts. He posted photos of himself at the old house, whiskey bottle always in hand, captions bragging about a new era for the Harlans. Each post drew both cheers and snickers in the comments, and I could almost see the cracks widening beneath his feet. He thought visibility made him stronger, but it only made the fall more spectacular when the ground gave way. The emotional whiplash came late one night when Claire found me staring at my phone, scrolling through another set of screenshots a friend had sent, this time of Daniel's private messages to a woman who wasn't his wife. The words were sloppy, reckless, proof not just of betrayal but of stupidity. Claire's face hardened as she read over my shoulder. "You're not just trying to take his money now, are you?" I swallowed, my voice low. "No, I'm taking his story. Money will follow." She shook her head, torn between fear and admiration. "Don't lose yourself in this, Michael. Sometimes revenge eats the hand that feeds it." Her warning lingered, but the fire inside me was past extinguishing. Still, her words haunted me enough that I tested my resolve. I drove out to the cemetery, snow crunching beneath my boots, and stood before my father's grave. The wind howled through the bare trees, and I whispered to the stone, "You trusted the wrong son, but I'll fix it. I'll restore what matters." Silence answered, heavy and eternal, but I felt something steadier in my chest as I turned back toward the truck. The whiskey bottle flashed in my mind again, broken tradition, broken trust, broken family. It wouldn't end in silence. It would end in spectacle. The trap tightened further when I orchestrated the first leak. Not a full strike, not yet, but a taste. A screenshot of Daniel bragging about skimming funds from a joint account hit a private community board where investors lurked. It spread quickly, whispers turning into questions, questions into doubts. Daniel stormed into town the next day, red-faced, waving his phone, shouting about fake news to anyone who would listen. But denial only fanned the fire. Every loud protest made him look guiltier. He called me that night, slurring, rage dripping through the phone line. "You think you can turn them against me, Mike? You think whispers scare me? I own this family. I own this town." I listened, silent, the phone pressed to my ear, and when he finally hung up, I whispered to the dead line, "No, Daniel. The details own you." It was almost too easy after that. Investors began pulling back. The bank demanded clearer records. Even the lawyer, Mr. Carver, began to show unease when Daniel came swaggering into meetings drunk. I stayed quiet, patient, always in the background, watching the news tighten one loop at a time. The whiskey bottle appeared in every social media post he made, its once sacred presence now reduced to a prop in his theater of arrogance. But to me, it was proof of desecration, and it would be the blade that cut him down in the end. The moment I knew the endgame was near came when I received another envelope in the mail, anonymous, but I had a guess. Inside was a receipt, crumpled and stained, showing Daniel had sold equipment from the family business under the table, pocketing cash while reporting losses. That was fraud, plain and simple, and combined with the clause in the charter, it was a death sentence for his claim. I sat at the table, holding that slip of paper, and laughed quietly for the first time in weeks. Justice wasn't coming, it was already here, printed in ink and signed by his own hand. But victory couldn't come quietly. Not after what he'd done to me, to Lily, to our father's memory. The exposure had to be public, undeniable, a spectacle that would echo longer than his laughter ever had. I began piecing together the final strike. The screenshots, the debts, the clause, the receipt, the photos of him desecrating the whiskey bottle. Each piece fit together like a puzzle, a picture only I could see clearly, and once assembled, it would be undeniable. Still, doubt crept in the night before I planned to act. Claire lay beside me, asleep, her breathing steady, while I stared at the ceiling, replaying the humiliation over and over. The laughter, Lily's red cheeks, the weight of being dismissed as a failure. And then the image shifted to Daniel's face when the truth hit him. The panic, the collapse, the silence where his arrogance used to be. I closed my eyes and whispered into the darkness. "Every empire falls by rot within. Tomorrow, he rots." The next day dawned gray and heavy, snow melting into slush along the roads. I dressed carefully, not in anger but in resolve, packing the evidence into a folder, tucking my phone into my pocket with the screenshots cued. The whiskey bottle burned in my mind, the final piece of symbolism, the thread that tied betrayal to justice. I looked at Lily as she ate her cereal, her trust still unbroken, and promised silently, "You'll see what strength looks like. You'll see the silence cut." And as I stepped out the door, folder under my arm, the world cold and waiting, I knew the moment had come, not for whispers, not for patience, but for spectacle. The stage was set, the noose tight, and all that remained was the final pull that would drop Daniel from his throne into the silence he had mocked me with. I walked toward the storm, heart pounding, mind razor-sharp, when I pushed open the doors of the town hall that evening. The warmth of the room hit me like a furnace. Bodies packed tight, voices buzzing with anticipation. Daniel had called the meeting himself, desperate to project strength after weeks of growing rumors, and he'd invited everyone, investors, family, old friends, anyone who could stroke his ego. At the front of the room, under the glow of cheap chandeliers, he stood with the whiskey bottle on the podium like a scepter, glass already half full, his smile stretched wide but brittle around the edges. "Family, friends," he boomed, voice too loud, too eager, "you've heard lies, whispers, slander. But tonight I'll set the record straight." The crowd murmured, half believing, half doubting, and I slipped quietly into the back row, the folder heavy in my hands, my silence sharper than ever. Daniel launched into his performance, spinning stories of strength and vision, painting himself as the victim of jealous attacks, lifting the whiskey bottle high as if its golden liquid could wash away sin. People clapped politely, though unease hung in the air, their eyes darting toward one another, searching for confirmation of doubt. My pulse thundered as I slid my phone from my pocket, finger hovering over the send button where the entire dossier waited. Screenshots, receipts, the contract clause, the woman's messages. A single tap, and the storm would break. But revenge, I reminded myself, is an art. It must land where it hurts most. I waited until Daniel took a long sip from the bottle, then swaggered into a story about how our father had chosen the stronger son, the son with vision, not the one who hides in shadows. Laughter rippled, but it was thin, forced, the kind of laughter people use when they're afraid of silence. I rose slowly from my chair, folder in hand, the crowd's eyes shifting toward me as though they felt a shift in the air. "Michael," Daniel sneered, his voice dripping disdain, "didn't think you'd show. Come to beg again?" I walked forward, each step deliberate, my voice calm but carrying. "No, I came to return something that was never yours." I reached the front, laid the folder flat on the podium, and flipped it open. The first page, Daniel's own signed receipt of the under-the-table sale, gleamed under the lights. Murmurs spread instantly, people leaning in, eyes widening. Daniel's grin faltered, but he forced a laugh. "More lies," he snapped, waving a dismissive hand. That was when I tapped my phone. Notifications buzzed in the crowd screens lighting up, messages spreading in real time. Screenshots of his debts, his affairs, his bragging about skimming funds, all flooding their devices at once. Gasps rose like a wave, whispers turning into shouts. Daniel's face drained of color as phones were held up, proof undeniable. Still, he clutched the whiskey bottle like a lifeline, his voice cracking. "These are fake. He's jealous. He's always been jealous." But the bank's representative stepped forward, voice firm. "These documents are authentic. And according to the charter your father signed, your debts disqualify you from inheritance." Silence followed, heavy, final, crushing. Daniel swayed, the bottle shaking in his grip, his kingdom collapsing in real time. The double twist landed when Mr. Carver, the lawyer, cleared his throat and added, "Which means, by law, all assets revert to Michael." Gasps erupted again, louder this time, and every eye turned to me. Daniel spun, eyes wild, shouting, "No, he doesn't deserve it, he's nothing." He lifted the whiskey bottle high, rage boiling, as if to hurl it across the room. I stepped forward, hand steady, and caught it before he could. The weight of it burned in my palm, the symbol of everything desecrated. I held it up, my voice low but carrying. "This bottle was sacred to our father. You turned it into a prop. Tonight it becomes justice." And I set it back on the podium, untouched, its amber liquid glowing like truth itself. The crowd erupted, some shouting, some filming, phones held high, the moment already spreading online faster than Daniel could blink. His empire of arrogance collapsed in minutes, reduced to viral clips and damning screenshots. He stumbled, eyes darting wildly, but there was no escape. The law, the town, the digital world, they had all closed in. Silence, my silence, had become his noose, and he dangled in it now, gasping. Security escorted him out, his protests shrill, pathetic, drowned by the storm of voices around him. I stood at the podium, the whiskey bottle gleaming beside me, and for a moment, the weight of it all threatened to crush me. But then I saw Lily in the crowd, her eyes shining with pride, and Claire beside her, tears on her cheeks. Strength isn't about fists or fury, it's about standing steady when the world tries to break you. As the room emptied, whispers still buzzing, I stayed behind, staring at the whiskey bottle. It was nearly empty now, Daniel having drained it night after night, but a single sip remained. I thought of my father, of his rule that it should only be opened when the family was whole, and I realized the cruel truth. The family would never be whole again. I lifted the bottle, not to drink, but to pour the last drops onto the floor, watching them soak into the wood. "That's for you, Dad," I whispered, "and for what should have been." Then I set the bottle down, empty, powerless at last. Walking out into the cold night, the air sharp in my lungs, I felt both victorious and hollow. Revenge had been mine, justice delivered, but scars don't vanish when the enemy falls. Lily slipped her hand into mine, her grip strong, grounding me. Claire walked on the other side, silent but steady, and together we stepped into the snow-dusted street, leaving the town hall's echoing voices behind. Every empire falls, my father once said, by rot from within. Daniel had been the rot, and I had cut it out, but the cost lingered in my chest. Still, as I looked at my daughter, her trust unbroken, I knew the lesson I would carry forever. Strength isn't about what you inherit, it's about what you build when the world tries to take everything away. And in America, where pride is fragile and families fracture over paper and signatures, the truth is simple. Money can be stolen, stories can be twisted, But dignity earned in silence and revealed in justice can never be taken. If this story resonated with you, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe. It helps us share more true stories like this.